Welcome back. Well, let's return to the possible deal between the Liberal Party and Labor over the superannuation tax. Now, the Australian reports today that Deputy Liberal leader and Shadow Treasurer Ted O'Brien is open to a deal on Labor's plan to tax super, providing they abandon the idea of taxing unrealised gains and index the threshold. Well, I spoke to Ted and asked him about this a little earlier. Ted O'Brien, thank you so much for your time. Your first interview since your new role as Shadow Treasurer. Is it true you're open to doing a deal with Labor on the super tax? And does this mean you're seriously considering supporting raising taxes on superannuation?
No, Sharri. In fact, we think that Labor's super tax is super big and super bad. I can't think of one element of it I like, candidly. And if, though, that Labor does want to speak to the coalition, then they'll have to walk away from a lot of those aspects of what they've put forward. There's no doubt in opposition we will be constructive where we can, but critical where we must. And when it comes to this super tax, at the moment, I see no choice but to be absolutely critical.
So to be clear, you will be opposing the super tax as well as the tax on unrealised capital gains. All elements of this you will be opposing.
Sharri, I can't preempt the final decision that ultimately will come through the party room, but what I can say is that there are aspects of this policy that Labor has put forward which are absolutely egregious. You mentioned a couple there, in particular the unrealised capital gains, and secondly, the lack of indexation. They are probably the most egregious of the lot. As for though where the party room eventually settles, that'll be a matter for the party room. But I can be very clear that in speaking with colleagues, they, like me, see no goodness in this whatsoever.
Because the Australian is reporting today that you would be open to doing a deal with Labor and supporting the tax on superannuation if they lifted the unrealised capital gains tax. So is that report in the Australian today wrong?
The report in the Australian today was accurate, where I made it clear that when it comes to all policies, including this one, the coalition will always be open. However, that doesn't mean a blank cheque. If indeed Jim Chalmers wants to come and have a discussion with the coalition about his super tax, well, he would have to firstly walk away from the unrealised capital gains component at least. He should be compromising on indexation. Now, if he caves in on all of those things and wants to talk about super reform, Sharri, let's have a chat about super reform.
All right, so
we'll be open to those discussions.
Because we've had some conflicting positions here. So just to be clear, if he walked away from the unrealised capital gains component, then you would consider supporting the superannuation tax? If
Jim Chalmers confirms he will walk away from the unrealised capital gains component and the indexation, then I think we can have a conversation. That does not mean that he will necessarily get support, but that's at least the basis for a conversation, because right now it is so unreasonable. This is such a bad policy that there is no possibility of any arrangement between the coalition and Labor. But if Labor sees the light and walks away from a whole bunch of issues here, especially those I mentioned, then certainly we can have a discussion. Now, whether they will or not, Sharri, your guess is as good as mine.
But Ted, wouldn't supporting the super tax, even if they walked away from unrealised capital gains and even if they supported indexation, wouldn't the coalition supporting the super tax indicate that the coalition does support higher taxes? And wasn't this one of the issues that the coalition had during the election campaign?
Well, look, if Labor did walk away from the components of its current measure, Sharri, it would depend on what they put on the table for discussion. But you're right, we had to learn some big lessons from the last election, and we have, and we continue to learn those lessons. One of those lessons is we need to ensure that we are staying true for being the party for lower taxes. And as I said before, there's no part of what Labor's put forward here that I like at all. I mean, the fact that taxes go up, the capital gains component, the indexation, the lack of integrity in what they put forward. where actually they want to see this passed through the Parliament, and then the Treasurer will decide the treatment of the Prime Minister. I mean, the whole thing is a dog. It really is. So again, but if Labor wants to walk all of that back and engage in good faith, talking about the possibility for super reform, of course, we'll be constructive where we can and critical where we must.
Look, I just want to ask you about a couple of the policies that you just admitted were a mistake during the election campaign. Do you agree that it was wrong that the Coalition opposed Labor's tax cuts?
Yes, Sharri, I do believe it was wrong. I think that was a mistake, and I think that's a mistake we all have to own, and we need to learn from that.
I reported here on Thursday that you were making calls during the day to try and calm the waters after 4 women were demoted or dumped in the shadow ministry. I mean, isn't it a bad sign that you needed as Deputy Leader to make those calls on your second day after the shadow ministry was announced?
Oh, Sharri, I suppose partly maybe as a Deputy Leader, but in truth, it's just about relationships and speaking to colleagues. I do that all the time. It was my approach in business for over 20 years. It's been my approach since I've been in Parliament. And there's no doubt when shadow ministries are announced, there are a lot of people there because we have such a depth in talent who could probably do with a phone call.
Were you involved in that decision to dump? Were you involved in that decision to dump or demote the 4 women for shadow cabinet? And did anyone stand up for those women?
So, Sharri, when it comes to the decisions on who serves in the shadow ministry, that's a matter only for the leader.
So you didn't agree with the decision?
No, of course I agreed with Susan's decision. I have to say that I think it's probably one of the toughest gigs for any leader, especially when you do look at the depth of the talent in the Liberal Party, to say, well, OK, I've got to form a shadow ministry out of this. That's tough because ultimately there are so many individual MPs and senators who absolutely have what it takes, but a decision does have to be made. I think Susan has put together
in hindsight, though, do you think it was the wrong call to dump or demote 4 of the most senior and experienced women from shadow cabinet? I mean, you talk about talented. These were 4 of the most talented women.
I do not question whatsoever the talent of all colleagues, including the ones to whom you refer, by the way. But I think your question to me is, do I believe ultimately that Susan has put together the right team? Yes, I do.
Quite my question.
And as you well know, Sharri, as you know, Sharri, you know, politics, like business, like other walks of life, there are ups and downs. I know from my own experience, there have been times when things haven't gone as well as I'd like, which again is why relationships are important. Every single member of the party has a really important role to play, and it's important they know that too, Sharri.
All right, Ted O'Brien, really appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.